drill down and we'll never find that ledger connecting this person to that payment to that event. What does this tell us about the construction of history itself?
I find that a fascinating question. I gave a lecture a couple of years ago in Dublin and began by asking the audience, how did you learn about the First World War? And you know what? About half an hour later, we were still discussing what had just been an opening remark. And what it did for me was it made me very, very aware of how exactly we learn history ourselves. There are those who are keen on history, for whom history somehow grabs a part of their soul and they want to learn more, and they read books and newspapers and watch documentaries and get into discussion. There are those who aren't and just run with whatever the headline of the day is. That's the nature of the world. But in school, we expect our teachers to be teaching us the truth. But then you've got to ask the question, well, who taught your teacher? How did your teacher become a teacher? And of course, teachers have passed through a college university process. They've learned from the works that their professors have said, here are the sources you will use when you're writing an essay. Here are the reviews and the various periodicals which we tell you are the ones which will guide you towards the answer to the question that we have set. Now, this is 100 years old, this process of actually the universities becoming the guardians of history. Inside that product, the teacher has to pass his university exams. If the teacher wants to use sources which someone else has deemed inappropriate, then I'm afraid they can't expect to pass their exams. And that's a fact. The whole process also of getting articles approved. One of the processes Jim and I went through, we sat with a number of lecturers from different universities asking about the control of history in their university. Now, all of these men and women were guaranteed that we would not in any way use anybody's name. And they come from all over the world, by the way, not just Scotland. And first of all, what surprised us, what we didn't realise is if James Corbett was a young history lecturer and he wanted to progress, he might write a paper on come on, Jim. He might write a paper on the Cuban crisis, okay? And he might have discovered that, in fact, one of the consequences of the Cuban crisis was an increase in refugees coming from Cuba to the United States and the impact that had on society. Now, so the young James Corbett goes and does this and investigates and discovers records which haven't been used and puts together an approved a paper on this very subject. For that to be recognised as an official paper of worth by the academic community, it would have to go through a process where peers read it. You wouldn't actually ever know who had read your paper, by the way, but it would be submitted to peers to read it. And if they read it and they liked it and they thought that it had some new light to shed on that particular topic, it might well find its way into a professional magazine, a professional periodic. If they didn't like it because it was perhaps suggesting that there had been malpractice and there was evidence of something that people shouldn't have been doing, or something had happened behind the scenes which no one wants to know about, then that would not be published. And they would be told that perhaps they haven't used enough recognised official text within the concept of what they're writing. And they would be advised that if they wanted to proceed and move up the ladder, that they really should follow the orthodox method and the orthodox view. Jim and I got into a discussion, not heated, but it was very lively, with a fairly senior lecturer, and he turned to us and said, "But don't you realise you know more about the First World War than we do, because we become specialists in micro subjects, and we give lectures to our students, which is based on the orthodox thinking or the latest approved book. There's an excellent new book called The Sleepwalkers, who's Clark, I think it's Clark's work, which infers that Europe sleepwalked into a war, that nobody saw this coming. Rather a clever wee concept, because it begins to unpick the notion that there were other influences here, you know, but doesn't seek to blame anybody. But this is the way in which the centre controls those new thinkers and people who, for example, we've over the last 4 years, we've had a history blog going out about the truth